Now, we have two additional guests that I should extend a formal welcome to, that being Stefania Guerra from Dexcom and Michelle Barry from Novonordisk to join us for the panel discussion. And Michelle, I might start with you on the links between industry and clinicians in trials and how best those links can be built and what can be done to get those two to gel together better. Steal a colleagues. Hang on, let's try it.
That one works.
Ah, there we go.
Thanks, Anton. I think your question was about the links between industry and this network, and I think it's working quite well. We're doing a lot of research. I know a lot of the people in the audience are currently involved in research in the industry. Some of the things that are tricky are understanding how to get to the right patient. So particularly with diabetes, most patients with diabetes, our understanding is they're actually probably sitting in primary care. And our traditional research centres are actually in secondary care. And this is an insulin or something like that, they're sitting in secondary care. So, you know, when we look at some of the research we're doing at the moment, it tends to be more focused towards maybe cardiovascular disease or something like that. We've pulled back a little bit from the traditional diabetes research. So I think this is going to be a big step forward for us in enhancing kind of the funnel. So maybe we might be able to broaden the type of research we're doing. I think probably open dialogue from us to the network, but also backwards. You know, we don't know what's going to be the question in 5 years' time. So if we can see something coming down the line that might involve a little bit of external or lateral thinking, that's put forward now rather than maybe the year or two before the proposal comes through. And backwards as well, if there's something happening, if diabetes treatment is changing, that we're aware of that as well, so that we can maybe raise the profile of the network at a global level with our colleagues.
Gotcha. On the topic of what's coming down the line, Stefania, we saw, that is your product, the Dexcom that we saw in the video,
Yes,
isn't it?
it is.
Your sense of the technological changes in diabetes treatment, are they as significant as I as a layperson think they have been? And will they continue to iterate at the kind of rate that we've seen?
It's absolutely huge. I was in academia 10 years ago, and we were doing closed-loop studies with a computer and infrared pumps, and everything was failing all the time. And if you think where we are now, we have solutions for patients. We have choice for patients. There are different solutions for people who want to be on a pump, for people who don't want to be on a pump. But what's important is that patients are empowered now to take better decisions, and it's huge, and it's going to get even better. Of course, we have closed-loop systems now where patients have to just wear the pump, take minimal decisions. Of course, they have to be on top of their management anyway, but a lot of those decisions are taken by algorithms right now. So we do have solutions like that, but we're also working, for example, on connected pens, on algorithms for people who don't want to be connected to a pump. And not only for type 1 diabetes, we're working for type 2 diabetes, and who knows, also for patients with cystic fibrosis. Whenever there is a dysglycemia, in theory, you can use a sensor, and potentially you can have algorithms to help these patients better manage their diseases. So
if that's the change that technology has brought, Seamus, let me bring you in on the changes that you have seen as a function of large-scale clinical trials, the contribution to diabetic care and particularly to patient outcomes as a result of large-scale trials.
Thanks, yes. So I guess I highlighted a couple of those in my talk. I've been involved in clinical trials since I came back to Ireland about 20-something years ago. And over that time, some of the biggest impact has been the finding that the treatments that we're using currently for, I think, type 2 diabetes not only can benefit the person in terms of controlling their blood sugar, but has these additional benefits in preventing or delaying the onset of cardiovascular disease and also preserving renal function. I didn't mention that, but it's the SGLT2 inhibitors, the empagliflozin group of drugs, they're extremely beneficial not only in protecting the patient against heart disease, but also in protecting them against the development of renal disease or progression of renal disease when it's developed. And I think really the advent of the SGLT2s and the GLP-1 analogs as treatments that not only improve glycemic control but have these additional benefits, because that was always the challenge. For many years we knew we were well able to control glycemic control, but cardiovascular events were still occurring. Statins made a huge impact in that from the point of view of cholesterol. But the additional benefit of these drugs in terms of reduction of complications, I think has been the biggest change.
While you're talking about trials, advice that you would have, recommendations you would have for increasing access and engagement of trial participants, whether that be patients, whether that be representative bodies or charities representing patients?
Sorry, can you repeat the
advice
question?
that you would have to try to increase access and involvement, particularly from representative charities in clinical trials?
So engagement in the clinical trials network like this, I think, is very important, and Diabetes Ireland is represented as a member of the clinical trial network, and I think that they can spread that message about the clinical trial network through their own network, and make people with diabetes aware that the clinical trial network exists. And as Prof Dunn has mentioned, and others have mentioned, we have representation within the network from all over the country. So really, I think anybody who wishes to participate in a clinical trial now has the opportunity through their local hospital, certainly in the adult population.
Thank you. Folks, does anybody want to ask a question of the panel? If you fire a hand up in the air, I will get a microphone over to you as quickly as possible. Was that a... This is it's like an auction. I saw a hand move and I nearly had somebody sold who was just waving. Okay, fine. You're still liable for the cost. Anybody want to ask a question of any of our panel participants? Yes, please. We have our first here, and then anybody want to follow this gentleman? Oh, no, hang on. We'll get your microphone. We'll do the full-on amplification.
Thank you.
There you go. Give us your name and your question, please.
Tomas Griffin. I'm a senior lecturer in medicine in the University of Limerick. My question for Professor O'Keefe and Professor Sreenan. So it's great that this is a wonderful initiative, and it'll be great to have access to the Diabetes Collaborative Clinical Trials Network. Have you any thoughts on how we can increase equality of access to diabetes clinical trials, specifically in areas that don't have H/B clinical research facilities or established kind of clinical research history? And I guess that lends also to the clinical service as to how we get broader access to novel technologies. Not an easy question, I guess.
Not an easy question indeed. I think the next stage of the clinical trial network is to leverage representation from outside the main centres. So we'll be looking to recruit members into the network from level 3 hospitals around the country, and hopefully that will help expand the availability for people with diabetes a little bit more remote from the main centres to participate in clinical trials. What was the second question? So I think there's a role probably for greater education. I think part of the problem for people with diabetes in Ireland accessing technology has been it's dependent on geography. If you're close to a centre that has the expertise for technology, then it's available to you. But there are other centres perhaps that don't have the level of expertise to deliver that service. And so I think programs like Derek has alluded to, educating the next generation of doctors, educating them about how to interpret all the data that comes from flash and continuous glucose monitoring, and also educating the other healthcare professionals required to participate in delivery of a technology service in hospitals.
Derek, I saw you nodding during that. Do you want to come in and add something? I would have to pick the furthest distance for the microphone to possibly travel.
Yes, I would just echo everything that Seamus has said. So again, it's incumbent on all of us to continue to learn. I do a module recently on smart pens. They're only on the market for 3 months. So we all have to keep learning about the technology that's coming out, because that's the new standard of care. And back to your question about access, it's really important. We're very lucky to live in a social system in Ireland where if you do have a chronic disease like type 1 diabetes, you do have a long-term illness card. You do get your medications and your technology and your visits paid for by the state, which is remarkable because lots of other jurisdictions in the world, speaking about equity around the planet, do not have that. So we are fortunate to have this system. And it's not perfect, but we live in an imperfect world. It's as good as it can be. And then through the actions of, in my case, the National Clinical Programme for Diabetes, working hand in hand with the diabetes charity advocacy group Diabetes Ireland, speaking with the government to make the decisions ultimately about where the budget go. We try really hard to make sure that the patients with diabetes get the resources that they need to improve their outcomes.
Can I ask you an unrelated question, but while you are talking, I might just follow up with it. You mentioned AI, or rather you gave us Google mentioning AI at length, and I listened to a man who was the former founder of Shazam that got sold on to Apple for quite a chunk of change. One of the things that he said was, the first time that he had seen a web browser, he felt the hackles on the back of his neck go up, and he said, this is going to fundamentally change all that we do. He said he hasn't felt that since until he saw ChatGPT and thought we are at that same inflection point again. Is the same true, do you think, in what it will do in a medical setting, and particularly in the treatment of diabetes long term? Sorry to throw that at you, but you brought AI into this.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so I have a 1 hour lecture I can give now. So yes is the answer. It's a transformative technology, artificial intelligence. There was actually, it's in the news again today that a bunch of CEOs have signed a letter saying how worried they are. People were very worried about electricity when it first came out. Electricity can kill people and so on. But I think the most important thing to remember is that all the AI that you hear about now is machine learning, which is called artificial narrow intelligence. It's very good at pattern recognition. So if I feed an algorithm, 1,000 pictures of a chihuahua and 1,000 pictures of a blueberry muffin, it can predict, that it's a chihuahua when I give it an on-screen picture, 60, 70% of the time. So even though it's very good at predicting things, it doesn't actually know what a chihuahua is. It's just pixel matching. And if you bring that into the medical world, we've seen, a lot of good papers come out in the last 5 years in the image specialties, so radiology, dermatology, pathology, ophthalmology, about machines outperforming consultant attending physicians at, spotting different diseases. And of course they're going to be able to do that because that's what they do. They crunch numbers. So algorithms will always outperform clinicians. We're just in that time zone where it's happening. And what it'll allow is it'll allow clinicians to do what they want to do, which is actually operate higher up their license and spend more time with the patients explaining the outcomes of those algorithms to the patients. So that's how it's going to change medicine. It's going to get rid of a lot of the mundane work.
I'm no body language expert, but I think you're getting fairly enthusiastic agreement from Stephanie. Do you want to add anything to that, Stephanie? Or Stefania, I should say. My apologies for taking away your
that's right. No, it's there's a lot of confusion when people talk about AI, so it's good to hear calling it with the right name, that it's narrow machine learning, and not general AI, which is something different. So, but it's useful. There's so many algorithms that can really help taking better decisions, but intelligence is something different.
Well, given, Declan, that was something that you were talking about, do you want to chip in at all on that? You're good. Okay. Final question, folks, if anybody wants to ask anything else. And if not, I'm going to invite Fidelma up to draw us to a close.